On the 20th of August, 1976, 30 bodies were dumped in a field 50 miles outside Buenos Aires, Argentina. The last time most of them had been seen alive was at the Central Police Headquarters. The victims of this massacre were buried in individual graves in the local cemetery in Derqui. 10 years later, the crime is finally being investigated. In the cemetery records, each no-name grave is marked by two N's, N-A-N-A in Spanish.
These are all of the cases as was recorded at the time, N-A-N-A.
Until this case here.
How many cases do we have here?
30 cases.
Do we know the sex of the individuals?
Probably, we're not sure, but probably we've got 20 male and 10 female. All of them with a bullet in the head.
Single gunshot wound to the head.
Yeah.
This is part of a new scientific endeavor to document the dark of military rule in Argentina and bring the guilty to justice. Here, forensic science is being used to investigate not just one crime, but thousands committed against an entire nation. For a country where the importance of paying homage to the dead is deeply felt, the anonymity of these deaths is a torment. Their grandest cemetery, La Recoleta, is a monumental necropolis dominated by the great names of the land. Among these crypts, the origins of Argentina's troubled political history can be traced. Past dictators, assassinated presidents, ambitious generals, and a national legend, Evita Perón. The country did not rest until her stolen remains were returned to Argentina 20 years after her death in 1952. The empty tomb left by Perón's enemies was a macabre foreshadowing of the Risari regime's deliberately cruel policy of not only murdering its people, but making them vanish without trace. Shortly after the military coup in 1976, the governor of Buenos Aires made the new policy clear. First, we will kill all the subversives. Then we will kill their collaborators. Then their sympathizers. Then those who remain indifferent. And finally, we will kill the timid. Under the guise of combating terrorism, the military dictatorship had evolved into a kind of state terrorism that threatened the entire population. One of those who later initiated the scientific work, Eric Stover, happened to be in the country at the time.
When I first came to Argentina, it was at the time of the military coup, and I traveled quite extensively through the country. And as I stopped in various towns, I would hear stories of arrests. I hadn't really been aware of the extent in which the repression was taking place there. Some 360 secret detention centers existed, where there were actually men who got up every day and went into these centers and acted as torturers, and that was their job.
Empty buildings, old garages, and police stations were all adapted to the torturers' needs. Perhaps the most infamous was the Naval Mechanics School, ESMA, where pregnant women were tortured and babies kidnapped after their mothers had given birth. The horror of those years has since been chronicled in an official government report called Nunca Más, which means never again. With the advent of democracy in 1983, the commission investigating the disappearances collected thousands of testimonies from survivors. Up to 30,000 may have disappeared. Much of the old police and military establishment remains intact. Some relatives are still afraid to report what happened. Others demand that all those responsible be brought to trial.